Hi, I'm Gary Ford from Tiger Hobbies Limited. This week's video covers the history of diecast aviation models and how the hobby really broke through to a wider audience in the late 1990s thanks to Corgi Aviation range, as you see on the display. Now, many people involved in diecast aviation, both in the hobby trade and among collectors, know that I have something of a love-hate relationship with Corgi, now part of Hornby, but that's never been aimed at the actual Corgi Aviation brand itself, which we've always stocked and continue to sell today. And I must admit, there's been over the last few years, recent improvements in the umbrella company of Corgi, which is Hornby, and there's not as many problems as there once were. We don't sell huge numbers of Corgi, but the models keep trickling through, and we're happy to offer this fantastic range of diecast aviation models. As the UK agents for Hobby Master, Corgi Aviation are technically direct competitors to us in the UK diecast aviation market, but without the breakthrough that Corgi achieved in the late 1990s, we simply would not have the hobby we enjoy today. So credit where credit's due to the Corgi Aviation range. We'll cover how Hobby Master came about in a follow-up video later. Before we look at the Corgi Aviation range as a brand on the display, let's take a quick look at the history of diecast aviation models in general. The first diecast models as we know them today were model cars produced in the early 1900s by a US company called Dow's Brothers. There were even examples dating back to the very, very late 1800s. However, it wasn't really until the 1930s that the hobby started in earnest. At that time, models were aimed primarily as toys, long before they were seen as collectibles. That said, collectors were around even then. Many people were already collecting different colour variations on the same model. In the United Kingdom, we had dinky toys produced by Frank Hornby's Meccano factory in the famous Binns Road factory in Liverpool. In France, there was Solido, launched in 1932, while in the United States, companies such as Arcade and Marx were producing diecast models as well. The real boom came in the 1950s consumer expansion after the Second World War, when brands like Spot On, Matchbox and Corgi started, famously known as the ones with windows, pushed the hobby to an entirely new level. Since then, there are hundreds of diecast model car brands like Ixo, Minichamps and many others, which really help promote this fascinating hobby of collecting diecast. It was also during the 1930s that the first mass-produced diecast aviation toys appeared, with companies like Tootsie Toys producing early examples. In the UK, Dinky produced a substantial range of diecast model aircraft. These were mainly civilian types, but they did include a number of military aircraft as well. As the clouds of war gathered in Europe, Dinky increasingly produced military subjects, including Royal Air Force fighters and bombers, such as the Hawker Hurricane and Fairy Battle. When war stopped, however, almost all production ceased. Today, these pre-war models in their original boxes are extremely collectible. After the war, production resumed and more aircraft models appeared, including jet aircraft, with improved colours, decals, under the Dinky Super Toy range. These models were still quite basic, fixed undercarriage, simple toy-like wheels, but they were usually popular. But in the late 1960s, the Battle of Britain movie gave Dinky a major opportunity, and they released a series of aircraft tied to the movie, featured much improved detail. These models included working undercarriage, motorised propellers, full colour markings, official movie branded packaging. Aircraft included the Spitfire and Ju-87, the latter even featuring a dropping bomb so you could dive it and press a little button and the bomb dropped onto your toy soldiers. Collectors snapped them up because they looked far closer to the real aircraft than earlier toys. Later releases included a Desert Scheme 109E Emile, Hurricane Mark II-C, jet aircraft such as Harrier and Phantom, an HS-125 executive jet with working air stairs, a Sea King helicopter, a Boeing 737 that if you took off from your toy runway, the undercarriage automatically retracted. Unfortunately, in the late 1970s and early 80s, many of the classic diecast companies either collapsed or were absorbed by others. Dinky was one of these casualties. For almost 20 years, there were very few serious diecast aviation models available. You still had toy-like models such as Matchbox Sky King, and the Matchbox Skybusters. The Sky Kings were slightly larger and the Skybusters obviously more like the original Matchbox toys. There were also some large modern US military aircraft produced by an American company, which I forget the name unfortunately, usually in a uniform dark grey finish. They were better than toys, but not much more than that. At the high end, there were very expensive collector's models from companies such as Danbury Mint and Franklin Mint, but these were generally mail order. In the late 1980s, things started to change with the rise of Gemini jets in the United States, producing civil aircraft in 1-400. These were designed purely for collectors and helped establish the modern world of high-quality die-cast airliner model collecting as we know it today. Then in 1997, Corgi launched their Corgi Aviation Archive Series. The range began with 144 scale civil airliners, including aircraft like the Vickers Viscount, DC-3, Lockheed Constellation. They even hired a real DC-3 from Aero Antique to help promote their range. And I think I went along, I think it might have been Manchester, where they brought the aircraft in to show you all these new aeroplanes on this actual aeroplane. Collectors responded enthusiastically because the prices were reasonable, the models had good detail, the tampo printing was excellent. There's always been a bit of controversy around the scale choice. Some say Corgi were advised to choose 144 instead of 1-200, which was already becoming popular among specialist airline collectors, possibly by someone who was developing their own competing 1-200 range. No names, of course, and no pack drill. While 144 works well for military aircraft, civil airliners today are more established in 1-200, 1-400 and even 1-500. In hindsight, this was possibly a missed opportunity for Corgi. Very few of those early 144 airlines were ever re-released after a period, and many ended up in the dump bins for just a few pounds. I remember buying them for as little as £3. Interestingly, over 20 years later, some have become quite collectible, particularly the military aircraft, such as Vulcan, Victor, Valiant, Lancaster, B-17, the C-130 Hercules and the massive 144 B-52 Stratofortress. But many of the airliners can be still found for under a tenner. One that is worth keeping out for is the 144 Vickers VC-10 in both British Airways and BOAC, British Overseas Airways Corporation, and Royal Air Force colours both as passenger and KC tanker versions. There's also a 707, which is quite good, in some classic, Pan Am and also the Air Force One aircraft. Things could have ended there and then for Corgi Aviation, but then they made a brilliant move. They shifted to an extremely popular modelling scale of 172. So around 2001, they released aircraft such as a 172nd scale Avro Lancaster bomber, Supermarine Spitfire, Hawker Hurricane and Messerschmitt Bf-109E. And that's really set the path for the Corgi Aviation range we know today. Shortly afterwards, in 2002, they released a 132nd scale Spitfire Mark 1 Battle of Britain edition, which proved hugely popular. Oddly, when they followed it with a Messerschmitt 109, they chose the later Gustav rather than the Battle of Britain Emil, or 109E, which disappointed many collectors. That's actually been done, funnily, by Qatari, made the same mistake, doing a range of Battle of Britain Spitfires, done a Messerschmitt and done the Bf-109K from the very end of the war. What a bizarre choice. Later releases include the 132nd scale P-51 Mustang, 132nd scale Hurricane, and the massive 132nd scale Mosquito, de Havilland Mosquito fighter bomber. Meanwhile, the 72nd scale range expanded rapidly with aircraft such as the B-17, Liberator, Halifax bomber, various Luftwaffe twin-engine aircraft such as Dorniers and Einkels. They produced a lovely range of 148 World War I aircraft, including Sopwith Camel, Fokker triplane, SE-5A and Albatross. At the time, the aviation range was one of Corgi's fastest growing product lines. Behind the scenes though, however, things were not going well financially for Corgi Classics, or as it was internationally known as Corgi International Limited, with I think it was primarily US owners. I remember going to toy fairs and seeing 172nd scale Lancasters being sold by clearance dealers for about £20 and even 132nd scale fighters for about £10. You can even buy the huge 32nd scale Mosquito for as little as £25 from dealers if you're on the toy fair scene at that time in the UK. Names like Puddin' Andy and Johnny Barnes of Golden Gains. I often filled my transit to the brim with them, sitting them for many years. To avoid upsetting collectors who paid full price, certificates were often removed and holes literally stamped through the boxes before they were dumped onto the market. In 2008, Corgi Classics ran into serious financial trouble when its US owners filed for Chapter 11, which is same as administration in the UK, so it protects the company from its creditors. Ormby acquired the company for about $7.5 million later in 2008. Around this time, partly because Corgi previously weren't paying some of their bills to its Chinese factories, Hobby Master entered the market, but that's a story for another video. There was a fairly quiet period for about 2 years for Corgi Aviation collectors, while Corgi were under its new owners, Hornby. Eventually, Hornby started to release regular releases, and since then, Corgi produced some excellent models, particularly 148 World War I aircraft, and later 148 jets, which we'll cover later. Many 72nd scale subjects not previously covered, like the Catalina, and there's even a Martin B-26 Marauder up there on the display. One thing we haven't seen though for a long time is very few releases from the older 132nd scale tooling, and almost nothing from the original 144 range. That may be due to cost, or possibly simply bad memories. In late 2000, Hobby Master began releasing 148 World War II fighters, which sold very well for Tiger Hobbies. However, some Corgi fans were not happy because certain aircraft, like the Spitfire Mark 14, Wildcats, some of the wonderful biplanes that we did, such as the Orca Fury and the Boeing aircraft from the 1930s, were appearing 148 scale, which Corgi haven't covered at the time. Some collectors even call 148 the Devil's Scale. Ironically, in 2017, Corgi themselves released a 148 English Electric Lightning, which generated huge excitement. They followed this with a 148 British Phantom FG1 and FGR2, Eurofighter Typhoon, Harrier GR9, and a BAE Systems Tornado. And guess what? They all sold extremely well. So much for the Devil's Scale. One of the original releases of 148 jets were Franklin Mint and later Armour, and they did produce some decent models, but accuracy wasn't always their priority. And for the UK hobby collector, well, they produced some proper horrors. A Harrier GR7 GR9 painted as a Sea Harrier FA2 and called it an FA2 on the box. US Phantoms painted as Royal Air Force FG1s or FGR2s and Royal Navy FG1s, with no modifications at all to the model. Tornado GR1 was even painted as a Tornado F3 air defence variant, so collectors in the UK weren't impressed. So, let's take a look at some of the models on display. At the front on the turntable, spinning happily, is a fairly new 148 English Electric Lightning F6 with overwing tanks. Next to it, on the stand, to the left, is a Eurofighter Typhoon Royal Air Force display Moggy. You can also get, if you shop around, and get the original Blackjack. These are both incredible. Not cheap though, at $189.99. But they are for the serious collector. And that 148 Lightning, as you can see, what an absolute incredible piece of diecast model it is. Complete with its overwing tanks, fantastic undercarriage, I think Skyflash missiles or Red Top, not sure which one they are, and the pilot access ladder and the air-to-air refueling probe. And if you also look, we've fitted it with the options you get in the box to put the covers on the jet intake and the jet exhausts at the back. Also on the display, we have the 72nd scale Adley Halifax London Revenge. Just to the right of that, B-17F Royal Flush, featured in the film TV programme Masters of the Air. So this is the aircraft flown by Lieutenant Rosenthal during the famous Munster raid, where he was the only aircraft to make it back from the 100th Bomb Group. We've got the B-26 Marauder, as mentioned earlier, Miss Arkansas, fairly new tooling from Corgi. 48 scale Bristol Fighter, along with the Fokker Eindecker. These are some of the later toolings from Corgi Aviation. After a long break, back with two fantastic new toolings, say the Bristol Fighter and the Fokker Eindecker in World War I 48 scale range. We've also got a Hawker Hurricane on the top of the display, flown by Billy Fisk during the Battle of Britain, one of the first, if not the first, US pilot to give his life in the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain, forming the Eagle squadrons. There's also a 109 also from the Battle of Britain down on your bottom right. Also on your right is a Westland Puma in 230 Squadron Tiger colours in its impressive display colours. All these models we sell at Tiger Hobbies at the recommended retail price. but you can use the code YT10, YouTube10, YT10, to get 10% off with free shipping on most of the models. Some of the larger Corgi models, mainly the ones at the bottom, may have some restrictions in the UK, or may have an additional shipping expense to get them some to the outer line areas of the UK. But most of the small models on the top come with complete free shipping, even after your discount code. The other models, I think I previously mentioned, that you can see on the bottom, with nothing to do with the aviation. It's just that it's the other range that from Corgi that Tiger Hobby has always sold, and that is the Corgi Vanguard range. These are some of the best 43rd scale diecast model cars for their money. They're around about $37.99. Some, I think the Transits and the Ford Rangers might be a little more. They include a great range of Ford cars, probably the best out there, including lots of fast Fords like XR3Is and RS2000s. There are also models representing, I think down on the bottom right, models from the smallish Cog range, which is a garage run by the TV personality Richard Hammond, as well as a midnight blue Ford Escort RS2000. Again, all covered by the YT10 discount code. So, that's a quick look at the history of Corgi Aviation and Corgi or diecast aviation in general. And once again, if it hadn't been for Corgi pushing diecast aircraft into the mainstream in the late 90s, we probably wouldn't have had companies like, obviously, Hobbymaster, Witty Wings, JC Wings, Century Wings, who sadly no longer with us, Aviation 72, X Plus, and the recent Caliber, who've recently done this massive 1/72nd scale B-58 Hustler jet bomber. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll look at the rise of Corgi's main competitor, that of Hobbymaster. Once again, thank you very much.